Hey everyone, welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates and I am your host. I've got the incredible Mike Tagliere here with me today, and you can find and follow both of us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how's it going, buddy?
It's going good. I was talking with you and our guest today before the show, is that my wife and I found we were cleaning out the basement. We found a Beanie Baby that apparently is worth like thousands of dollars in our basement. And I have zero clue what to do with it because I don't want to touch it anymore. I don't want to bend it. Apparently the beads matter. I don't know what to do with it. So if anybody out there knows what to do with Beanie Babies, I don't know how to get this thing like appraised or whatever, because it's one of these tie-dye piece bearer. I don't know. I'm in a good mood though. It's obviously a good thing to find something like that in your house.
It might be the wrong audience to ask for advice on selling Beanie Babies, but hey, go for it.
Gotta take your shot, man.
Yeah, call your shot. We've brought on one of my favorite people to talk to, and that's Justin Boone, the lead fantasy football analyst at theScore. He's always one of the most accurate experts, and I'm excited to talk some football with him today. You can find him on Twitter at Justin Boone. Justin, welcome back, man.
Thanks for having me. I gotta say, though, when I first came on before the show started and Tags opened up by asking how much I know about Beanie Babies, I was really thrown for a loop.
Yeah, you thought that was going to be the topic for today. We're not talking about football. We're talking about Beanie Babies for the rest.
He knows everything about football. Why not everything about Beanie Babies too?
That's the next landscape to take over for sure.
The next hurdle. Yeah, completely. All right, guys. Tags, I want to make sure people know about a super useful tool before we get into the content of today's show, and that's our Draft Assistant. What exactly is the Draft Assistant, and why should people use it?
Oh, the Draft Assistant is a lifesaver. I actually did a draft last night, an industry draft. It was a 14-team league with super flex, deep starting rosters and everything. And what our Draft Assistant does is basically you can do anything from cheat sheets in there. It can have who the experts recommend, but in an auction, it is like invaluable. And I was telling Dan offline last night that basically I can't imagine doing a draft without it anymore, because you're able to put your rankings in there, and based on your league settings, depending on if it's a 10-team, 12-team, 14-team leagues and the starting position, it's going to vary in terms of what you should be spending on each player. So it actually properly values them. And if you guys are following me on Twitter, which by the way, you guys really should be on Twitter, especially this time of the year, this year with all the injuries happening, like make sure you're on Twitter and following us, because we're going to give you all the updates. But I posted my roster on there and people are like, this team looks like it could be a 12-team roster and you should be very happy with it. But it was a 14-team league with analysts. So it goes to show you the Draft Assistant literally walks you through a draft and it shows you basically the values you need to live by, and just go by that, and I promise you're going to dominate your draft.
Absolutely. Just to reiterate, it can sync with your draft and offer pick suggestions with a percent odds of any player getting taken before your next pick if you're in a redraft league, along with so much other valuable expert advice. Our Copilot feature, too, allows you to draft straight from the Draft Assistant for NFL.com and ESPN drafts. It's a sleek layout, very easy to use, guys, and the same interface as our draft simulator. And we support all kinds of leagues from all kinds of commissioner sites like ESPN, NFL.com, Yahoo, CBS Sports, and Sleeper, along with many others. Crush your draft with our Draft Assistant at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Again, that's fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Now, keep in mind also that only MVP and Hall of Fame subscribers can sync the Draft Assistant with their online draft and use it for auction drafts as well, like Tags mentioned. Fortunately, we've got a special offer going on right now for 6 free months of our Hall of Fame package, which is our highest subscription tier and a $65 value. Check out fantasypros.com/offers to claim this amazing offer today. All right, let's talk about a couple of these news items that came out since we recorded yesterday's podcast, guys. Alvin Kamara had missed several days of practice, which we did talk about on yesterday's podcast, but then it came out later that Kamara may actually end up being traded from the New Orleans Saints. The two sides are working hard to finalize a new deal, but they're apparently still pretty far apart. Tags, let's say that you have a draft tonight, and this is all the information that you have. Are you drafting Kamara as the RB4, which is where he's been going?
I am, yeah. He's actually reportedly going to come back to practice today, and it was a ploy by him to try and say, hey, I'm going to stay away from the team. It's going to cause commotion. You guys need to re-sign me. And then they came out on social media and basically called his bluff and said, hey, we're willing to trade Alvin Kamara. They told some beat reporters that. So now he's reportedly coming back to practice. I think it's going to happen, just like Joe Mixon. Does it affect the way I'm drafting tonight? It's really tough. We talked about in the podcast yesterday with Sig, because I thought maybe you could just take Derrick Henry there and eliminate a lot of the concern. And you might still want to do that, although I do, and this is literally just my guess, I do think it happens with Kamara and that he's back on the field for the Saints in 2020.
Yep. And then, guys, additionally, Joe Mixon signed a 4-year extension with the Cincinnati Bengals. After some concern that he was missing practice with migraines, he now gets paid. So let's talk about the fantasy significance of this. Justin, there's a ton of uncertainty with these top running backs right now, right? You heard it in Tags' voice there. Does Mixon move into Kamara's spot as the RB4 off the board now for you? Where is Mixon at? Because you do have these concerns of Kamara, Dalvin Cook potentially holding out, Kenyon Drake to Miles Sanders with injury concerns. Where does Mixon land for you?
Well, I don't think that Mixon is without his own concerns still, even though he got the contract thing figured out, right? That offensive line in Cincy still isn't very good. I know they're going to get Jonah Williams back, but the rest of that line is still pretty bad there. So there's still some concerns with Mixon. So for me, he stays at the end of that first round in that low end RB1 range, but I bumped him back up to RB9 at this point. But I'm not going to move him all the way up into the top 5 until we see. And I'm excited about that offense. Don't get me wrong, with Joe Burrow coming in and breathing some life in there. And it seems like they're all very excited in Cincinnati with Burrow. But I'm not going to bump Mixon up into the top 5 just yet. I'm still going to take guys like Kamara, because it sounds like I had Sig on my podcast yesterday as well. We kind of both booked him yesterday, and he probably said the exact same thing with you guys, and it's exactly what I was thinking, which is they're going to get this deal done with Kamara because they got Drew Brees for 1 more year, and we think maybe Brees will come back next year, but I think this is probably going to be it for him. They're going to do everything they can to try to win this season, and they're going to want to keep Kamara for that. They're not going to be able to replace him at this point, so I'm still excited about Kamara in that top 5. And I would still take Dalvin Cook. It seems like the beat writers there, for everything that Adam Schefter said about how he's kind of scared about taking Cook, the beat writers were pretty clear that Cook got more reps in practice after the contract talks cut off. And just because this is all negotiating, Tags kind of touched on it. Just because the contract talks ended doesn't mean that the agent and the team aren't talking, doesn't mean that a deal could come at any point here. I still feel pretty confident that Cook's going to get a deal done before the season starts as well. So we'll see what happens, but I'm still taking those guys over Mixon.
Are you guys worried about Cook and the fact that when they traded for Ngakoue, that it took up all the cap room they had left? So if they were to get a deal done with Cook, it would have to be like future money, and that's terrible to do with the running back.
Did they not just restructure Riley Reif's contract though? Wasn't that did that open up some money?
They did. So that could potentially open up some money. The thing is, like, with Dalvin Cook, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but with Dalvin Cook, he doesn't have, he has leverage, but he doesn't have a ton where it's not like he's been fully healthy. I mentioned it recently. Dalvin Cook has yet to play a full 16-game season. So when you're trying to hold out and like put pressure on the team to give you a big contract, you have to be able to say, I've been healthy. I've been on the field. Now, he's been absolutely productive when he's been on the field, but he doesn't necessarily have that going for him. So behind the scenes, it could be at the point where they say, with the Ngakoue trade and that eating up some cap, and then again, like you mentioned, Justin, that could open up with the Riley Reif restructuring, but he could just say, okay, I've got to play this year, and then I might be heading for free agency next year. Like, that could just be where he's at right now. So as far as Cook, for me personally, I'm not as concerned. I think he is going to play this year because I don't think he has the true leverage to position it. But I did want to double back to Mixon here super quick. I put this out on Twitter earlier. From weeks 11 through 17 last season, Mixon was the RB3 in all of fantasy football. And that was during the time that Ryan Finley was starting and completing 40% of his passes. So now if we look at Mixon and we say Joe Burrow stepping into this offense is a huge upgrade, even as a rookie, from Ryan Finley and Andy Dalton being pulled in and out of the lineup. So, Tags, I wanted to get your thoughts really quick here. Where does Mixon land for you after the contract?
I have Mixon right there around as the 7th running back, him and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because we're hearing whispers out there, and this is probably a little bit of news too, is that we're hearing whispers that the Chiefs could be interested in Leonard Fournette now that he's cleared waivers, which would obviously throw a giant wrench into drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire with that pick. So you might be safer going with Joe Mixon at 7 over Edwards-Helaire right now. Really hoping that's not the case, because I want Edwards-Helaire to have that 3-down role there in Kansas City. But yeah, I'd probably take Mixon at 7 right now among running backs and just play it safe, because again, with Edwards-Helaire you have worries. With Miles Sanders, you always have worries about Doug Peterson, what he's going to do. Miles Sanders dealing with an undisclosed injury. Kenyon Drake obviously just getting out of his walking boot. There's so many question marks with those running backs. Just take Mixon.
Yeah, that was going to be the next thing I mentioned, was that Leonard Fournette cleared waivers after being released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He can now sign with any team. And then, but I was going to mention, it's going to be very hard to find a spot that he lands that's going to give him the type of workload that he would have seen in Jacksonville, even like trying to find a spot in general with the running back depth charts, the way that they've been solidified up to this point in camp. So, but again, I did want to mention that Kansas City has been rumored as a landing spot. Of course, we'll keep you updated as we hear more news. Another one that I just wanted to quickly gloss over, Carson Wentz is reportedly dealing with a minor injury, but all reports are that he should be ready to go for week 1. So if you're looking for this quarterback at the back end, a low-end QB1, Carson Wentz is a fantastic option. I still really like him, even though you have Jalen Reagor missing time and Alshon Jeffrey out of the lineup as well. I still really like him. Tyrell Williams, the Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver, has now been placed on IR. So Tags, this has to move Bryan Edwards up your rankings, right?
Yeah, it did, but I'm still not going to go crazy. I know there's some people out there like, oh, should I drop Deontay Johnson for Bryan Edwards? No, I'm not doing stuff like that. No, that's what some people are doing. They're kind of going crazy. I still think that Ruggs is the guy you want in this offense. I also think this probably helps Darren Waller. Darren Waller is someone that we started worrying, okay, now that there's a lot more targets at wide receiver, do we start losing some of those? But we can't forget, this is a rookie coming into the NFL. He hasn't seen any preseason action. Derek Carr has never... Even going back to Amari Cooper, I mean, Derek Carr did not support a consistent fantasy wide receiver. So to think that, Ruggs is not going to be the number one is just crazy, because they obviously drafted him 2 rounds before Edwards. They're going to get the ball in his hands. They're talking about involving Jacobs. I think this helps Jacobs a little bit, get a little bit more targets. It just clears out about, I would say 70 targets in the offense roughly with Tyrell Williams gone. So obviously Edwards is going to see a big chunk of that walking into the starting lineup in 2 wide receiver sets, but it's a funnel effect. Hunter Renfrow is actually going to be viable because they're going to have to move him into the slot when they go 3 wide now. It's just it's a big funnel effect that goes throughout the entire offense. And sure, I'm going to move players around, but I'm not going to reach for these players because it's still the Raiders offense.
Yeah, it's all about expectation management, right? I like Edwards as a last spot on my bench because that's where you can get him in drafts right now, or you can pick him up off the waiver wire. You're going to find out pretty quickly what you have in him. And if he hits, then he hits. And you can keep him on your roster. If he doesn't, then you can drop him. Don't go out and drop like a Deontay Johnson or someone that you drafted in the top 10 rounds, to go pick up Bryan Edwards. So another one here, Kenyon Drake has been dealing with a foot injury, but he is reportedly close to practicing in full. Justin, super quick, where are you drafting Kenyon Drake right now?
Oh, he's still right up there for me. I would take him, honestly, in the middle of the first round. I love everything about him. I think in the times that I've been on with you guys during the offseason, I feel like Tags, I know for sure, was very high on him. I don't know if he still is, but for me, what we saw from him in half a season last year, and it's a small sample size, but it's not minuscule, right? It's something. And what we saw from him in that offense, I think he's a guy that has that top 5 upside. I'm going to take him. Right now, I have him as my RB6. And I'm very happy if I can get him in the end of the first round. And sometimes now with this injury, he's still falling to the second round. And at that point, that is an absolute steal, because no matter who it is in that Cardinals backfield, and this is what we saw last year, and I know it was the first season with Cliff Kingsbury, but we saw the running backs produce there, right? Whether it was David Johnson being a top 5 back in the first 6 weeks before he got hurt, whether it was Chase Edmonds in that one start, 150 yards from scrimmage, 3 touchdowns, or whether it was Drake coming in the second half of the season and then just going wild. And if you take those numbers from the second half of the year and you put them out on pace over a full 16-game season, the only running back that would have outscored him in fantasy was Christian McCaffrey last year. So I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen, but it shows us the kind of upside that he has. So I still really like Drake, and they've acted like this injury wasn't that serious. And obviously Drake came out himself and said, I was in a walking boot this time last year, like, don't freak out, everybody. And I love that you guys are being so level-headed about this stuff, because I feel like people are very prone to overreacting about everything. When you talk about something like Bryan Edwards getting hype and everybody just jumping overboard and going, oh my God, right? We got to get him no matter what. No, you got to look at it. That's why I love doing projections with this stuff, because then you can look at it and go, okay, Bryan Edwards is going to get more work, but how much work is it actually going to be, right? Is that going to make him a wide receiver 3? Probably not. The odds are probably still pretty slim. So when I look at Drake, I absolutely love him. And yeah, I don't think people should overreact to the injury stuff, because right now it doesn't seem like it's that serious.
Yeah, if you're drafting towards the turn in a 12-team league and you can walk out with Joe Mixon in the first round and then Kenyon Drake falls in the second, and those can be you double up on running back early, I would love that start. Chris Carson says he is 100% and he should be good to go for the start of the season. So that's just something I did want to quickly just mention, because that was one of the big concerns that I had with Chris Carson was, what's he going to be at the start of the season? Now you can talk about, is he going to hold on to the job all year when Rashad Penny comes back? But at this point, throughout the first start of the season, he is going to absolutely contribute for your rosters, guys. Before we keep going with today's show, I want to make sure everyone knows about FanDuel. The Fantasy Pros Football Podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. This season, there's a brand new way to play fantasy football on FanDuel. Introducing Best Ball Contests, the simplest way to play season-long fantasy. In a Best Ball Contest, there's no lineups to set, no waivers to claim, and no trades to make. Simply draft 20 players at the start of the season. Then, every week, you'll automatically get points for your top 9 performers at set positions. At the end of the season, the teams with the top scores take home the cash. I did my first ever Best Ball draft on FanDuel recently, and it was amazing. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's not a hassle to manage throughout the season. I get to do my favorite part of fantasy football, which is drafting, and then I don't have to worry about making the right start decisions or worrying about the waiver wire. It's a different strategy too, so if you're tired of playing the same format every single year with your friends, you need to check out Best Ball on FanDuel. Best Ball contests have a 12-player max, so don't worry if you're not a seasoned fantasy pro. And if you want to try your hand at Best Ball, you can enter a free contest, or play for as little as $1. If you're new to FanDuel, you can even get a 20% bonus on your first deposit, up to $500 when you sign up at FanDuel.com/fantasypros. So be sure to go to FanDuel.com/fantasypros to start drafting for Best Ball at FanDuel. Okay, let's move into this discussion for today's show. We are looking at our own rankings, and we're talking about the guys who have been rising recently and the guys who have been falling. We're going to go around the room and talk about each position here, and hopefully we get out in under an hour and a half. So let's go to Tags first here to talk about running backs and someone that he's seen rise up his rankings, and then we'll go to Justin for the same.
Yeah, it's really difficult this time of the year with running backs because we almost know the workloads. But obviously, Joe Mixon is someone that's moved up considerably in my rankings because I had him down as far as 11 among running backs because of this contract situation with all the worries. And now you're starting to add, and I know we just talked about Mixon, but you start to add in all the concerns about the running backs around him. Nick Chubb's going to deal with Kareem Hunt. Aaron Jones, we obviously know the concerns with him. Austin Eckler, he had 73.5% of his production through the air last year. No other top 20 running back had more than like 48% of his production through the air. So when you subtract, a bunch of pass attempts from the offense, losing Phillip Rivers, I do think it affects him. I like Eckler. I like him just fine as a low end RB1, high end RB2. And then you get into Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We're talking about Leonard Fournette. They're talking about Darrell Williams actually playing very well and maybe stealing some of that goal line work from him. You're talking about Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake. A lot of guys have question marks in that range. So now Mixon eliminated the question marks he's had. You were worried about that contract situation. You didn't know if the migraines were a real thing or if it was about the contract, but all of a sudden the migraines are gone. Everything's good. He's back to practice. All that stuff is gone. So Mixon is someone that's actually moved up, and I'm probably willing to take him right after Derrick Henry right now as the 7th running back off the board.
Yeah, for context, I'm right there with Tags. I have him at RB6 actually. So, but again, it all depends on how you want to build your roster. If we see right now, I still have Kamara at 4 until we get some more clarity on this situation. So if we start to continue into the next couple days and we don't have clarity, if Kamara misses today's practice or whatever, that will move him down my board and we'll see Mixon rise up. I still really like him this year. All right, Justin, let's go on to you. Let's move over here. Who is a running back that you've seen rise up your rankings recently?
I pulled up my rankings here. I mean, it's funny because it tends to be the guys that are further down that make the biggest jumps, right? Like Darrell Williams was somebody that made a massive jump because I thought it was going to be DeAndre Washington as the immediate backup there. Now with the Leonard Fournette news and maybe Fournette ends up there, obviously that would throw a wrench in the whole thing. But he's moved up. I mean, Darrell Williams right now for the time being, I've moved him up right below sort of those elite backups just because of what he could do in that offense, whether he gets a weekly role or if, and we don't want to see this happen, but if Edwards-Helaire got hurt. Same thing with a guy like Benny Snell. Just I sort of guessed wrong. I was really into Anthony McFarland, and maybe he will have a role as a pass catcher there. But Benny Snell showed up and kind of did the Le'Veon Bell thing from year 1 to year 2, where he came back, lost a bunch of weight, reshaped his body. I think they said he lost 12 pounds, and he looks like a different back now. And it's pretty clear that he is the number 2 if something happens to James Conner. And we don't want to call anybody injury prone, but I've had Edwin Porras of Fantasy Pros on our show. I've had Matthew Betts of Ball Blast Football on our show, 2 really good injury analysts in the industry, and they each mentioned concerns about James Conner due to the past cancer treatments, whether that could have an impact on his ligaments and maybe lead to some of those soft tissue injuries that he's had. So it's not a guarantee. You cannot plan for injury, but they suggested that Connor might need that reduced workload to get through a full season. And from what we're hearing out of Pittsburgh, that's not something that's going to happen. So you want to own the backup there, and Benny Snell's the guy. And Connor at this point, I mean, he's kind of like the Will Fuller of running backs, right? Like if you get him in your lineup when he's there, he's going to be good for you. But outside of that, you have to prepare that he might miss half the season or something like that. But I mean, okay, so those are kind of like cheating because they're so far down. Higher up, I mean, in the top 20, Jonathan Taylor. And I know that there's concerns. I know that people are very worried that Marlon Mack is going to remain involved. I thought I was high on Taylor before the season, before the training camp started. But then when you hear all these reports coming out and how well he's playing in camp and all these long runs that he's breaking, it is only a matter of time here before he's just going to blow the doors off and push Marlon Mack to the bench. It might happen even before week 1, to be honest. And I don't know if you guys saw the interview with Mack, but I talked about it on our podcast, and actually Sig brought it up again yesterday, that he just looked kind of sad. I know it's narrative chasing, but he seemed like a guy who just knew that he was about to lose his starting job, right? So when you look at it, I mean, there's a reason why the Colts took a running back high in the second round, and it was not because they're planning to continue to use Marlon Mack forever. I know Nyheim Hines is probably going to remain involved, but if you really think about it, this is another one. When you look at the projections, Hines is not Austin Eckler. Hines is not going to be able to be that guy for Phillip Rivers where he's going to have that kind of fantasy value. In real life, absolutely, he'll catch some passes there and he'll be an effective part of that offense. But he is not somebody that's going to jump up and be a top 20 fantasy asset. Whereas in the meanwhile, we're hearing reports that Taylor is a candidate to contribute in the passing game. That recently came out in the last couple of days here. So I know that Taylor, he's dealt with a few drops. Didn't do much as a pass catcher until the final year in college, really. They just didn't really use him like that. And it's similar to Derrick Henry, where I think Taylor can be a pretty effective weapon in the passing game if they let him be. And the Titans have just never really allowed Henry to do that. I think the Colts are already realizing what they have. I think it's already out of the box in their camp. They know what they got, the best pure runner in this class. You're meshing him with the best offensive line in the league. And I'm so excited. I mean, after that top 14 running back. So for me, the end of that is kind of that Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler range and that, late second to early third. After that, it's Chris Carson for me at RB15. And then it's Taylor up at RB16. Now, I want to have him on my roster for when that explosion happens, because it's coming this season at some point.
I mean, you're talking to the two people that absolutely agree, can't agree with you more.
Fantastic.
Right? So I have Jonathan Taylor at RB15. Tags, where do you have Jonathan Taylor?
I am at RB17, just because I have James Conner in front of him. But yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Jonathan Taylor, that was always my thought with Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack, was you put Mack on the field, and yes, he can contribute behind this offensive line, right? We've seen it. He's been a good fantasy running back. However, you put Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack on the same field, and it's not a competition. It was kind of the same thought process with you put a healthy Cam Newton on the field and a Jarrett Stidham on the field, and it's just not even a competition, because a healthy Cam Newton is 10 times as talented as a Jarrett Stidham. It's kind of the same argument with Jonathan Taylor here and Marlon Mack. So I absolutely expect Taylor to take over this job, maybe even, like you said, Justin, even before week 1. So I love the call there. Guys, the guy I'm going to bring up is Ronald Jones in my rankings. Ronald Jones has skyrocketed up my rankings, and this was partially due to the fact that throughout the offseason, I was high on Keyshawn Vaughn. I loved Vaughn coming out. I've talked about that coming out of Vanderbilt. And then we see reports that he's not adjusting. I think going on the COVID list to begin training camp probably didn't help things, right? But he's had troubles adjusting. He is just not going to be a factor in this offense. It appears that he's just not getting up to speed. And so when you look at, now they have LaShawn McCoy at 32 years old now, however old he is, he's not going to do much. He will still be on the field for certain instances, but he's not going to take enough work away from Ronald Jones for him to not be valuable. And in a high-powered offense, I want the running back, especially when you factor in that Ronald Jones' ADP is still down at RB30, guys. His ECR is RB28. I have him at RB21 now. Yes, he does come with the concerns, right? And I'm not going to pretend that this doesn't exist, that he doesn't come with the concerns that is he misses one blitz pickup, which was his weak spot in his game, and he's going to ride the bench. Yes, totally get that. However, I would have more concern about that if we were drafting him as a top 12 running back, a top 15 running back. However, he is going at RB30. So the risk reward here with drafting Ronald Jones to be your RB3 on your roster, I don't see any risk. Tags, I know that you have been the Ronald Jones guy all offseason, so I'll turn this over to you. At that price tag, is there any risk involved?
No, you're getting to the point where if you miss on a draft pick in like the fifth, sixth round or whatever, wherever he's going, sometimes he fell to the seventh, eighth round, but most leagues I think he's going to go in the fifth, sixth round right now. And I don't think that you lose your fantasy draft if that misses. And he's not going to miss right off the bat. We know that because Keyshawn Vaughn is so far behind. LaShawn McCoy is nothing to worry about. They're not signing Leonard Fournette. Everything that Bruce Arians is saying is everything we want to hear. He basically came out today that he had an interview with one of the beat reporters and said Ronald Jones has improved in his pass protection. He's improved as a pass catcher. He had one bad day in camp with drops, but outside of that, he's been fantastic. And it's so funny because those that are looking to fit their narrative that Ronald Jones is not a good pass catcher, all they're going to do is point to one highlight that they saw from camp. I mean, have we never seen Julio Jones drop a football? Stop it. I'm not saying he's Julio Jones, but I'm just saying like choosing somebody on their worst day. There's podcast highlights you could pull out that I was just terrible, but we don't want to be judged on that type of stuff. So Ronald Jones is the lead back in that offense that should be top 10, probably scoring offense. So I definitely want to be attached to him. I have him at RB 23. I could definitely make the case for him going higher, but again, you want to have some room for equity when you take someone like that.
Of course. Justin, super quick, before we move on to these guys that are falling down our rankings, what are your thoughts here on Ronald Jones and where do you have him ranked?
Well, I have him ranked at RB26. I definitely have to give Tags props, though, because Tags has been on this one the whole way. I was not a big Ronald Jones fan, but one thing we have to be open to is players getting better. Like you just said about the Bruce Arians comments, right? That you can get better. Like I said about Benny Snell, a guy can go into the offseason and put in the work and reshape his body and come back really a different player. And we're seeing that, I think, with Ronald Jones from his first season to now. He's improved, he's been dedicated, and he's going to get his shot here. And if you want Keyshawn Vaughn at this point, even if someone drafts him in your league, my guess is they're probably going to drop him early in the season because it's going to be Ronald Jones and it's going to be LaShawn McCoy. LaShawn McCoy, I don't think he has that much left in the tank, though. So there's a good shot that if Keyshawn Vaughn gets involved, it's going to be later in the season, and maybe that owner will drop him at some point, and then you'll be able to just sneak in and grab Vaughn at that point and throw him on your bench. So I wouldn't be drafting Vaughn unless you're going to take him with your late last round pick, but I think there's probably better options to grab early in the season.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, let's move over to these guys who are falling down our rankings. Tags, we'll go to you and then Justin.
I mean, it's got to be David Montgomery for me. I don't like drafting players that have an injury coming into the season. It's something I learned last year, with AJ Green, where, I was telling people, oh, he fell far enough in drafts where, I think you should grab him here. And, he's going to pay off and it's going to this and it's going to that. Well, David Montgomery, not only do we have the risk of the Bears signing Leonard Fournette, which I think the Bears should do, and this is coming from a Bears fan. I think Leonard Fournette has been unfairly criticized. He's played for a bad football team and a bad offense, and I think if he were to start his career, in Minnesota, we'd be talking about a different running back. I think that he's a better version of David Montgomery, and I think he suits very well alongside Tariq Cohen. So there obviously are some concerns, and the Bears have zero depth behind David Montgomery, so they should have been signing a running back to begin with anyway. They really should have this entire time. So this injury only adds to that. And then again, coming into the season with a soft tissue injury to your groin, if he tries to push, and come back too early from that injury, if his foot slips on the turf, whatever may happen, he's going to miss another month. And it's like, now we have to take the time to let this heal. So there's just too much risk for me right now because he's still being drafted in starter range. I'm okay getting him as a bench player that you don't have to rely on for the first couple of weeks, but I'm out.
It's fair. I think that the concern is how far does he fall for you to say that I am willing to take the shot? Because once he's back on the field, you're not going to find a running back in that range of ADP who is going to see the type of workload that David Montgomery will when he's healthy. So that's the question that I'll pose, and I'll actually pose this to Justin here. Like, how far does David Montgomery have to fall for you to say, okay, I will take him now?
I'm not going to touch him at this point until really probably the 9th round. And that means I don't think he's going to end up on very many of my teams. And we don't know what's going to happen with maybe a Fournette like Tags was talking about. I wonder for Tags, though, as a Bears fan, is it going to hurt when you're watching Cam Newton and Leonard Fournette starting for the Patriots this year?
Oh, geez. That's not going to happen, though, right? Like, please, someone tell me that's not going to happen.
The Patriots did say that they will not be looking into bringing in Leonard Fournette.
They have too many running backs there.
Yeah, they
Well,
have,
I know
yeah.
Nelson Souza, who's pretty active in the fantasy football Twitter community there. He was saying that, and I don't know what his sources are, but he was saying that there's an offer that the Patriots put out, and he was suggesting, actually, we've mentioned him a million times here, Sigmund Bloom, they were having a conversation on Twitter, and he was telling Sig that maybe don't rule out the Patriots yet. So
Oh, my
keep
word.
an eye on that one. Who knows?
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, let's move on to Justin. I think you're up here for a running back who is falling down your rankings.
I'll say Melvin Gordon. And I was really hopeful when he signed there that he would step into that lead back role. And he still might. I mean, he profiles as, or at least before this training camp started, he profiled as the better pass catcher, as the goal line back. But then he's been banged up, might have come in a little out of shape, it seems like. And he's trying to get acclimated to a new team here. So missing time is going to hurt him even more. And then you have Phillip Lindsay, who... this guy has just never seen a challenge that's too big for him, right? And he has answered the bell, raring to go this year. And according to reports, Lindsay's showing more as a pass catcher now. And remember, down the stretch last season, they completely stopped using him in that role. Like, they just didn't want him. And that's why I was really high on Melvin Gordon to start the offseason. But now, if Lindsay's improved there and he's running so well, he could potentially force that 50-50 split or something close to it. So you got to give all the respect in the world to Lindsay. Another guy, actually, that we could count as somebody that should probably be moving up draft boards. But Gordon's now outside of my top 20 backs, and I might even drop him further in my next update.
It's fair, Tags. What are your thoughts here on Melvin Gordon?
I mean, that's obviously worrisome to hear Boone talking about that. Melvin Gordon, I have at running back 19 right now. I just have him ahead of the guys that I'm worried about, like Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, everybody's concerned about Bell. I still think that he's going to be a fine low-end RB2, high-end RB3. I think it's the hates got to the point where it's gone too far, where Bell's fallen like the 5th round. That's fine. David Johnson, a guy that looked like he looked done the last time we saw him on a football field. And it's not to say that he is done, but I don't think that he fits the Texans offense very well. And I think Duke Johnson is probably the better option for them right now. So I think that turns into more of a timeshare than people expect. Mark Ingram going to lose carries to J.K. Dobbins. So it's about the players in that range that I'm taking Melvin Gordon over. Like Ronald Jones, for example. He's someone that I think he has upside that's higher than maybe Melvin Gordon? Potentially, but I don't think that there's any chance that Melvin Gordon loses his job considering, what they paid him in free agency. It clearly showed that Pat Shurmur wanted a workhorse running back brought in. It's unfortunate for Phillip Lindsay because he's a very good running back, but Melvin Gordon, I just put him ahead of those guys because I have less question marks is all.
Yeah, for me, I'll just transition because you mentioned him, Tags. It's Le'Veon Bell. And even though I do have Le'Veon Bell, RB22 in my rankings, this is one of these guys that I'm just saying, like, I think he can finish here, but I don't want him on any of my rosters, right? Like, I just do not want to deal with the potential outcome and the potential week in and week out volatility of having a Adam Gase running back, just especially when I have to pay that price tag for him. Granted, it's not as absurd as some of these other guys, but give me Ronald Jones at RB30 over Le'Veon Bell, right? Like, that's just the way that I'm looking at it. And you mentioned some of those names that are going in that range, a Melvin Gordon, a Le'Veon Bell, maybe James Conner is not necessarily in that conversation, but a Mark Ingram, David Johnson, like, that's just a range of these running backs that I don't know if I necessarily really want to have any part of, which is why in mock drafts up to this point of the offseason, I've loved going running back, and then hammering these wide receivers in that range, right? We're talking about the 4th round where I was getting Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods, right? So that's the conversation. It's not necessarily that I'm not projecting Le'Veon Bell to finish outside the top 30 running backs. Like, he's going to see enough volume, especially when you factor in Brashad Perryman has missed an entire week of practice. And then Denzel Mims is just doing individual drills now. Like, he doesn't seem like he's going to be ready to start the season. They're rolling out Jamison Crowder, Chris Hogan, and Josh Bellamy as their wide receivers in week 1. So Le'Veon Bell has to see volume, right? But in a low-scoring offense, this is just not one that I necessarily want to invest in. But I do think that he can finish up there. So it's just all about looking at the draft as a whole and saying, where do I want to invest my picks in? And just up to this point, I've loved going the wide receivers that are in this range rather than the running backs. Before we continue on with the show, I want to tell you all about Trophy Smack. Attention fantasy football commissioners and champions. You put in the time, now reward yourself in your league with something worth bragging about. TrophySmack.com has you covered with customizable trophies, championship belts, rings, loser awards, and more. Trophy Smack offers free shipping and free engraving to immortalize your league's champions. Best of all, our listeners get a free championship ring with any trophy or belt purchase. Just add your free ring to cart with your epic trophy or belt and use promo code FantasyPros at checkout. Visit TrophySmack.com/FantasyPros to customize your league's trophy now. TrophySmack.com/FantasyPros. Let's move over to wide receiver here and some of these guys that are rising up our rankings. Tags, let's go to you first.
I'm going to go to what Sig talked about yesterday. I'm going to say it's Jerry Jeudy. I moved him to my wide receiver 39 as one of the best wide receiver fours that you could have on your fantasy team. You may not have to rely on him right away, but at the same time, what he brings to the offense, and obviously, I love Jeudy in the draft process. He was my favorite wide receiver, and I felt like there was a tier break behind him. Like, I don't think CeeDee Lamb was close to Jerry Jeudy, but Jeudy, like, going to camp and surprising people, it doesn't surprise me, but I love what I'm hearing, and especially when someone like Cecil Lammey that covers the Broncos exclusively, he's saying that if wherever you're drafting him, it's not high enough. And that tells me that they're using him in a lot of different ways. They're going to get the ball in his hands. And under Pat Shurmur, if you look at his offense, going back to Minnesota, what he did with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, Thielen specifically because he moved him into the slot a lot. We haven't seen that with Thielen ever since Shurmur left. He goes off to New York, and you see Sterling Shepard did very well in 2018. 2019, Golden Tate was good when he came on the field. I don't think people realize the floor that Golden Tate had. So when you take Jerry Jeudy and you move him around the offense, you give Drew Lock one of those other options, a guy that has just natural separation in his routes, and knowing that Cortland Sutton is probably going to demand number one coverage most of the time, Jerry Jeudy is a guy that I probably wasn't high on enough in redraft. Obviously in Dynasty, I'm as high as you can be, but in redraft, I've moved him up my board considerably.
I joked on our podcast yesterday that Sig was, his joy and his curiosity and stuff is so infectious in the industry. And he's clearly infected us because we've only mentioned him about a dozen times so far on this podcast. But I think you have to listen. When Cecil says stuff about the Broncos, you have to listen because he was the one touting Peyton Manning that year that Peyton went off and had the huge season with the Broncos. He was the one touting in practices saying something special is happening here. And this is an offense you're going to want to pay up to get all these pieces. And if you did, you probably won your fantasy league that year. So you got to be listening. And yeah, absolutely. If he's saying that about Jerry Jeudy, then we're moving him up our rankings.
This is a crazy part with Jerry Jeudy. ECR, wide receiver 52. ADP, wide receiver 42 in half PPR format. So experts are lower than the general population here on Jerry Jeudy, which is super interesting for me. I would have figured it would have been the other way around. All right, Justin, let's go to you here for a wide receiver that you're rising on.
Well, overall, I got to give props to a lot of these rookies that showed up ready because one of the off-season storylines was that, the rookies might be a little bit behind. We always see tight ends take some time to acclimate. Maybe the running backs could do it because running backs a little easier, but the receivers could take some time. A lot of these guys showed up ready to go and ready to take on big time roles. And I have another rookie here I want to talk about. We mentioned him earlier. It's Henry Ruggs. I keep moving him up every time I do my projections. And I know all that hype is on Edwards, but no one seems to be giving Ruggs the credit that he deserves here. He played in a absolutely stacked Alabama receiving corps. And you got to remember, somebody like Terry McLaurin was kind of underappreciated in college because he was in that stacked Ohio State offense, right? I think Ruggs could be a similar guy. And he was the first receiver taken in this year's draft for a reason. Like, that has to be mentioned. And he went to a team that has a massive void at receiver. They had nothing there. And he steps in as the lead guy. I like Jeudy. I like CeeDee Lamb, who's another guy that's just balling out in camp apparently. But Ruggs has a shot to lead this team in targets. At worst, he's going to challenge Darren Waller and they'll be close there. And Ruggs can win in a variety of ways. I know people want to paint him because he has that speed. They want to paint him as a downfield threat, but he can carve you up and they're going to use him. Derek Carr is going to throw these little slants and they're going to hit him with those slants. And he has that speed to take those kind of passes to the house. So Ruggs actually right now is my top ranked rookie receiver. And I have him right on that fringe wide receiver 3 range as my wide receiver 38. And I think, he's a guy who could really step up. I want to mention someone else real quick too here. Maybe a post-hype sleeper, and I won't spend too much time because I know you said you don't want to go an hour and a half here, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling is somebody that I think we should be paying attention to because we know the Packers didn't bring in anybody. Well, they brought in Devin Funchess, but he opted out. Yeah, but Allen Lazard's been the one that's kind of been getting the hype as the potential number 2 behind Devontae Adams. And we know at tight end, there's not that much. I mean, now they're saying Robert Tonyan and Jay Sternberger are kind of battling it out there. So it doesn't look like you're going to get a massive difference maker there. And MVS, last year at this time, I think we were all kind of excited about MVS. He flashed as a rookie, and now he was going to step up, maybe get a bigger opportunity. And early in the season, he had a few big games. I think he had 99 yards and a touchdown in one game, 133 and a touchdown in another a couple weeks later. This year, though, he has showed up and he has answered the call, because last season, one of the knocks, he got hurt, but also Aaron Rodgers just seemed frustrated with him. I think the coaching staff might have been too, that he didn't have that professionalism, didn't have that consistency to his game, and they were calling on him to do that. And he actually is doing it now. Every single day we're seeing stories come out, and it's not getting huge press because it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, right? We're not talking about a first round rookie receiver or something, but every single day we're getting stories about how he's showing up, how he's giving that consistency, how he's doing really well in, they had their scrimmage and he made all these catches, third, fourth down conversions. And, I joked on our podcast that Aaron Nagler put out, he's one of the Packers beat guys. He put out a Matrix meme that MVS is beginning to believe like Neo. And really that's all we need, because the talent is there. So if he gets that confidence and that consistency to his game that Rodgers, the coaching staff have all been calling for, he might end up being the second most productive receiver here, and he could end up being a guy that ends up being a fantasy starter after all.
Fun fact about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I believe he's moving back into the slot now that Geronimo Allison's gone, now that Allen Lazard is seemingly the other starter opposite Devontae Adams. And I think this is really good for Valdes-Scantling. I do an article every year. It's like, how do slot targets affect fantasy football? And I go through slot targets and perimeter targets and find out the players that really, really benefit from slot work. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling, over the last 2 years combined, he's the number 2 wide receiver in terms of the difference there is between slot and perimeter targets. So it really depends on where he's playing. If he's playing on the perimeter, I don't want him. If he's playing in the slot, then I think he's a lot more valuable. But again, I think this all comes back to Matt LaFleur and being I'm not even going to go where I think Matt LaFleur is, but I'm just going to instead of saying LaFleur moving forward, could I just say Adam Gase Jr.? I'm worried about what Adam Gase Jr. is going to do basically with Aaron Rodgers and just hide him in this offense for whatever reason. But I've grabbed Valdes-Scantling in a couple dynasty leagues because I'm actually with you on this one, Justin. I always thought that there was a chance this kid popped back up because he has flashed at times.
I like him as like Tag said, a late dynasty guy, especially like super late startups. I think that you can get a value on him, and if he hits, then he hits. If he doesn't, and this offense looks different than what we're expecting, then you don't, the cost to acquire him. I'm not looking at him in redraft leagues necessarily right now, especially in, just typical 16 rounds. If you're playing in deeper leagues, then maybe. But for right now, I'm not looking at Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I am going to double back here to Henry Ruggs, though, Justin, because that was my guy. And literally every point that you made, I was just nodding along because I completely agree. This was my wide receiver 2 coming out in this class. It was Jerry Jeudy at 1, and then it was Henry Ruggs at 2. We cannot just stereotype Henry Ruggs into this just pure speed guy and talk about him in the same breath that we do of like a Marquise Goodwin. Like, that is just not who he is. He is more well-rounded of a receiver. He is tough as nails, competitive, can beat press coverage on the outside, can get open, can take any sort of slant, quick pass. Like, you give him shallow crosses. He can take it and create after the catch. So, and he can make contested catches too, deep downfield. So this is someone that I want to invest in. And the Tyrell Williams news was all that I needed to be able to say, okay, here's how I clear up the targets for him in this offense. I have him as a wide receiver 3 this season. I've loved him. I have him as a wide receiver 3 now. I love him this year, and I think that he is absolutely going to contribute for fantasy football for redraft leagues right out of the gates. Again, Justin, you mentioned he's your top rookie wide receiver. I'm right there with you.
I have him at 41. He's the number 2 behind Jerry Jeudy, but they're close.
All right, guys, let's move over to the wide receivers who are falling down our rankings. Tags, you're up here first. Who do you got?
A couple of rookies. We're just hearing bad things because, again, when training camp starts, everybody looks good. Everybody looks great. Yeah, I hear it. But it's the people that we hear negative things about that we want to actually take to heart. And we've heard, obviously, negative things about Justin Jefferson. We talked about him a little bit on the podcast yesterday. It seems like he might be the number 4 wide receiver on that team to start the year, and that's a horrible. You can't draft him in a low-volume offense that threw the ball like 440 times last year. Another player that's moving down is Denzel Mims, undraftable. There was a point in the offseason where I said, there's a clear path to him getting to 100 targets. It kind of felt like a Devontae Parker situation from last year where there was really no clear-cut number 1 on the team. Rashad Perriman, he was fine with Jameis Winston, but I don't know how well he fits this offense. Robbie Anderson was obviously the field stretcher in that offense, and that's kind of how I vision them doing that. But Denzel Mims hasn't taken advantage of this opportunity that he's had to walk into this offense and build chemistry with Sam Darnold. Instead, we're hearing all these things about Jamison Crowder and Chris Herndon, which makes sense because over the course of his career, Sam Darnold has actually absolutely loved his targets over the middle of the field. So Denzel Mims is a clear loser here. Same thing with Justin Jefferson. Two guys that I do believe are talented and they're going to make an impact in this league, but they are undraftable now in redraft leagues.
Justin, what are your thoughts there on Justin Jefferson particularly? We were talking, again, I'm going to name drop here with Sig. We were talking about Justin Jefferson with him, and this is just a guy that he's not super confident in. If Olabisi Johnson is starting this season, then that's a concern. So where are you at with Justin Jefferson? Where do you have him in your ranks?
Yeah, I moved him way down as well. He's outside of my top 60, and I kind of agree with Tags that he's not somebody I'm drafting at all. And what I love about this, and it's unfortunate for Jefferson in the start to his career, but it solidifies Thielen as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. It makes Irv Smith so interesting now as a breakout candidate, where I had him sort of at the bottom of those potential late round guys. Now it pushes him right up into the mix with all of them. It would not shock me if Irv Smith becomes a top 12 fantasy tight end this year. And Mims, I'm right there with you, because for me, my fallers, it might be a couple, but it's all these injured guys when you look at them. I know some people that when guys get injured in the preseason and training camp, they take them off their fantasy draft boards. They don't even want to deal with that because they're worried there's going to be re-injury, or they're worried they're going to miss more time than people realize. So all these guys, AJ Green can't seem to stay on the field. Mike Williams, Jalen Reagor, we know those guys are going to miss time early in the season. Brashad Perriman, who's come up already, he's somebody I was really interested in as a deep sleeper. He's been sidelined for a while now. I think he's back doing some stuff on the side at camp today. Brandon Ayuk, missing time, maybe missing that opportunity that he had, that window where Deebo Samuel was going to be out for a couple games early in the season. Maybe Ayuk could have capitalized. Now he's probably going to miss that time. And oddly enough, the one guy that we were really worried about was Deebo Samuel. And now the reports on him are kind of positive, right? The reports on him seem to be that he actually might be able to come back early in the season, and hopefully he can avoid any sort of, re-aggravation or re-injury there, because we know with those foot issues, they can really linger. So I would keep Deebo in mind. Those other guys, I'm probably shying away from in all leagues.
Yeah, AJ Green, again, was the guy that I was going to bring up. Looking at AJ Green, just cannot get on the field. And this was... I could have put him, like, if we did this podcast like a week and a half ago, and we talked about guys that were rising up my rankings, AJ Green probably would have been the guy that I talked about, because I was starting to come around. I was starting to say, okay, I'm a believer in his talent. I'm a believer in the opportunity. Maybe it's the fact that I've been listening to Tags and I talk way too much, but saying like I was coming around on AJ Green. Well, then now looking at the fact that he's missed an entire week of practice, he's still limited in practice, like, and this was the main concern. It's not the talent level. The talent level is absolutely there. But for fantasy football, you have to be on the field. Like, breaking news, you have to be on the field and in order to be able to contribute. And that's just not a guarantee with AJ Green. So I've moved him way down my rankings. This is just a guy who I am looking to avoid. I know, Tags, you mentioned, like, right when it came out that AJ Green was going to miss some time, like that he was dealing with this potential nagging injury, that you said, like, I'm not concerned yet. Are you at the point now where you're concerned?
No, because he was back and they had him running off to the side, and they're basically easing him back in as a veteran, which kind of makes sense. I don't think that there's any rush to get him back on the practice field. What's practice really going to do for AJ Green at this stage in his career? Outside of getting chemistry with Joe Burrow, which is fine, and that's all great. But again, it's AJ Green. This guy's been in the league for a long time. I did move him down a little bit, but not to the point where I'm not going to draft him, because again, at the point where he's going in drafts, you are not getting a sure thing at that point in your draft. You're really not. There's a lot of guys that you're talking about potential breakout candidates in that range. And AJ Green, the part that blows my mind is that T.Y. Hilton and Adam Thielen are going ahead of him. These guys are both over 30 years old. They haven't been as productive as AJ Green has been in his career. They didn't get a giant upgrade at quarterback. I really don't understand the hate for AJ Green. I do understand the risk associated with him, and I like him as a wide receiver 3 now, because before I was willing to say, I think he's a low end 2, but I'll take him as a wide receiver 3, and I can easily find someone else to plug in that role if AJ were to miss some time, like someone like Henry Ruggs, like someone like Jerry Jeudy, who are going later in drafts. So I just think that wide receiver is a position that I don't want to say easily replaceable, but it is more replaceable than running back, to find someone in that wide receiver 3 slot, which is where AJ Green is going. He's going around the wide receiver 30 to 32 range in most of the drafts I'm doing. That's perfectly fine, because again, who doesn't come with risk in that range?
Yeah, the T.Y. Hilton over A.J. Green does not make any sense to me. I don't know where you're at, Justin, on that, but that just doesn't make any sense to me. All right, guys, let's move on to the quarterback position here, and let's talk about a guy who is rising at our rankings. Let's actually do this because we're running out of time here. Let's do both of these guys back to back. So, Justin, who's a guy that you're rising in your rankings, and who's a guy that's falling in your rankings?
All right, well, the riser would be Gardner Minshew.
Yep.
And, I mean, really, I could say that about the entire Jags passing attack here, because it seems like not only does Minshew have a pretty good grasp here at Jay Gruden's system, but all the receiving weapons there are getting positive pub, right? DJ Shark looks like he's going to be able to build off that breakout year. Laviska Shenault seems to still be being slept on. I mean, this guy, he can do it all. He can even get carries out of the backfield. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people as a rookie. And then we even got positive press about Chris Conley and Keelan Cole and another rookie, Colin Johnson. Even Tyler Eifert back from the dead has gotten some positive news about him. So, Minshew's on a team that we expect to be trailing quite a bit. I think their Vegas win total is like 4.5 games. I don't know if that's changed with Fournette leaving. I doubt it. But so they're going to be in comeback mode a lot, and with Fournette gone, maybe they're not going to be compelled to have to run the ball as much. Maybe they do just open things up, even in neutral game scripts, right? Maybe they decide to throw a little bit more in Gruden's system. So there could be some real fantasy production there that comes out of that group. And that's not even mentioning Minshew's rushing numbers, which is the real thing that gives him a shot to potentially be a top 12, top 15 fantasy quarterback. And then for Faller, I don't really have a great name. I mean, based on what we've said the whole time here, Sam Darnold's probably the guy with all these injuries to the receivers and the new guys, Perriman and Mims, him not being able to have time to build chemistry with those guys. And then just that whole umbrella of Adam Gase over everything. The offensive line taking some time to gel. I know they've brought in some more pieces, but doesn't sound like it's really come together yet for them. So the receiving core is decimated. And I mean, it's not that anybody was really drafting Darnold high, but I'm even considering like moving him below like Dwayne Haskins at this point. Like I think like Darnold's just that far down for me.
Yeah. And
that's fair.
Yeah. By the way, news just came out that Adam Gase says that Rashad's Perriman his knee is swelling up after a few days, that it feels good. Then all of a sudden it swells up again. So it sounds like there might be something close to, I don't want to say season ending for Rashad Perriman, but it sounds like he's not going to play anytime soon. So yeah, I'm with you on that. But my biggest follower would be Jimmy Garoppolo. Garoppolo is a guy that's legitimately lost all of his pass catchers. You know what I mean? Like his top arguably 3 wide receivers are not going to be out on the field for him in week 1, maybe. I mean, I don't know if Ayuk is actually considered to be someone that might miss week 1, but then you have George Kittle dealing with some sort of hamstring thing. And it's like, where did all these pass catchers go? It's not like people were drafting Garoppolo with very much equity, but people were relying on him as a streamer in week 1 against Arizona. I'm dropping him, and I'm right there with you, Boone. Gardner Minshew is somebody that's climbed up my rankings. He's the best QB2 target, and 2 QB formats are super flex. If you're looking to wait on a quarterback and you just want to stack your roster everywhere else, get Gardner Minshew as like the 18th to 20th quarterback off the board, and you're going to be set.
Here's the thing I wanted to mention with Gardner Minshew, talking about the inflate, and you mentioned it, Justin, like, are they going to be forced to run the ball as much? Well, I don't think so. I think they can comfortably air the ball out because guess what? In college at Washington State, Gardner Minshew threw the ball with Mike Leach 662 times in 2018 in 13 games, guys. So yes, he can handle throwing the ball a ridiculous amount of times. And so if that's the case, then there's going to be fantasy value for these guys in this system where you're looking at, D.D. Westbrook, Keelan Cole, Chris Conley, all these guys, someone is going to break out outside of DJ Chark and be a consistent option. So I don't necessarily think that Gardner Minshew, again, with them trailing, is going to be throwing for a ton of passing touchdowns, right? But again, when you're looking at just pure passing volume, the yardage could be there, and then additionally the rushing yardage as well. That could inflate him into a top 15 finish this year, definitely into the streaming consideration at several points. Guys, I'm going to mention Joe Burrow as someone who just continually creeps up my rankings. Just steadily, he's rising now. I've got him all the way up at QB 15 on the year. I could even make a case that he could be even higher than that as like a borderline QB 12, QB 1 there. So this is a guy who's rising in my rankings. I love his opportunity. Not crazy about his matchup in week 1, but yet after that, I think it lightens up and I think he could absolutely contribute for your roster. Daniel Jones is going to be the guy that I'm talking about who's falling down my rankings. We've talked about his schedule consistently, that he goes up against a gauntlet of top defenses. And again, we can sit here and a lot can change by the time that we get to week 6, right? But as we're looking at these defenses now, we're saying that I'm not going to be recommending, at least right now, I'm not going to be recommending Daniel Jones as a starter until like week 12 against Cincinnati. That's how good these defenses are that he's going up against. And with his fumbling and interception issues, just not someone that I want to rely on. So again, he could be throwing the ball a ton, but with these interceptions, it brings him down my rankings. So that is a guy that I am definitely fading. Let's talk about those two guys super quick before we move on to tight ends. Tags, I know that you're on the Joe Burrow side. Where are you landing with Daniel Jones right now, though?
Yeah, Daniel Jones is one of those guys that you could take in 2 quarterback formats, but I'm not drafting him in standard leagues because again, if you're drafting a quarterback and you're playing that approach, you don't want to hold on to him, especially early in the season. Those bench spots that you have in leagues, especially this year with all the COVID stuff going on, those bench spots are so valuable. And if you're not going to use Daniel Jones for the first 3 weeks, you're better off letting someone else draft him, and then they're going to drop him. And at some point, you could pick him up and kind of see what happens. But I'm not expecting much at the beginning. I have him at QB 16 right now because I do think at the end of the year, all things will even out with his rushing totals in that. But I would rather take someone like Joe Burrow than Daniel Jones.
Justin, super quick. Where are you at with Daniel Jones?
Yeah, Tags nailed it right there. I feel the exact same way that I think he's going to have an okay season, but I think it's really unfortunate that schedule is so tough early on, and you are probably going to be able to get him on the waiver wire in week 5 or week 6 or something like that. But he has so many weapons there, and the rushing ability. I do still think that he'll be able to win you some fantasy games, but it might not be till the second half of the year. And Burrow is so intriguing because that whole range there, I mean, Jared Goff and Ben Roethlisberger and Burrow, and if you want to go a little bit deeper and say like Minshew and Bridgewater, there are so many interesting quarterbacks in that range who I think could sneak in to the low end of that top 12 and maybe be low end QB1s on the year.
All right, let's move over to tight ends here. Tags, let's go to you. Who are your 2 guys, one that's rising and one that's falling?
Yeah, Blake Jarwin has moved up. My rankings continually does. And by the way, guys, can I just say that the Cowboys, we heard you, Justin, you mentioned about CeeDee Lamb earlier. You walk through this, okay? We have Amari Cooper, who's obviously one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. We have Michael Gallup, who Mike McCarthy said is a wide receiver 1. We have CeeDee Lamb, who's the next coming of Calvin Johnson, apparently. We have Blake Jarwin, who's dominating camp. Is there anybody we have not heard about as the Cowboys? They all can't be great. Let's understand that. But at the tight end position, that's one where targets, that's what matters. This is the same offensive coordinator walking into 2020. This is a team that targeted the tight end position 122 or 124 times last year. Jason Witten is gone. And it's like, even though CeeDee Lamb's going to get targets, let's not pretend that Randall Cobb wasn't there last year. He saw 82 targets. So even if we pump up CeeDee Lamb to 100 targets, which is, I think, is reaching a little bit, you're taking off 18 targets from the tight ends. There's still 100 targets there. There is no competition for Jarwin. I would so much rather have Blake Jarwin on my roster than someone like Austin Hooper, who's going way before him. I would rather have him than someone like Jared Cook. And I would rather have him before Noah Fant, who is the guy who has fallen down my draft boards.
Let's touch on Fant there really quick because I'll just foreshadowing here. Jarwin's my guy too. So let's touch on Fant here super quick. Why exactly is he falling down? Is it because you moved Jerry Jeudy up?
Yeah, I moved Jeudy up. Obviously, Cortland Sutton's a guy that's going to get targeted. You go to last year and Fant, even actually when Drew Lock came in the lineup, Fant got targeted less. I think he averaged like 3 targets per game when Drew Lock was under center. And then you add in, Jeudy, you add in KJ Hamler, you add in Melvin Gordon to this offense, and all of a sudden there's a lot of guys fighting for targets here. And it's not to say that Noah Fant's not a good football player. I think he can, and I think eventually he's going to be one of those tight ends we talk about is maybe a top 5 option. I just don't think that there's enough room in this offense right now for him to get, I don't even think he's going to get 75 targets this year. I would actually be shocked if he saw more than 70. And when you're seeing that amount of targets, it's really tough to break out as a tight end. So I've moved him down my list in favor of guys that have higher projected targets like Blake Jarwin.
And they drafted another tight end in
Albert
Boone, right? And he's even gotten some hype a little bit in camp that maybe he could be like a red zone guy there for them and siphon just a few touchdowns, and that hurts Fant too. Yeah, I have Fant way down at tight end, a 20 at this point, and yeah, he's not somebody that I've ended up with very much of.
That's fair. All right, let's go to you, Justin. Who are these guys that you want to highlight at the tight end position?
Hawkinson is mine. I mean, there's a reason why this guy was one of the best tight end prospects coming out and a teammate of Fant. And I think at this point right now, they're going in slightly different directions. And I know there's a lot of target competition on both those teams, but man, we are hearing so many positive things about Hawkinson. you have the injury that shortened last year for him and kind of derailed his season. He had that big early game, but that was also against the Cardinals, and we found out they were terrible at defending tight ends. So we're not going to overrate that game too much. But, the only negative right now is that Hawkinson said that he's 100%, but he still feels that ankle. But to me, that's just a young player learning to come back from injury, right? And he's still mindful of the ankle. But everything we're hearing out of camp is just beat writers gushing about him, that he's toying with linebackers and DBs, that he's out-muscling them and out-jumping them and just beating them to the ball. And I think that was the quote by Chris Burke, actually, where he used all out-muscling, out-jumping, all that stuff. And I think the only DB that they said had any sort of success against him was Tracy Walker. And even then it wasn't that much. So you just had all these quotes. I mean, Kyle Mankey had a quote that Hawkinson's going to be, much greater in the receiving game this year. And he said he can't emphasize it enough, especially downfield. So they are using him in that way. They are trying to get him involved. They spent very high draft capital to get him. And, I've said it before on my show, you don't want to just base your opinion on one beat writer. But when you're hearing it from all of the beat writers, that's when you know something's happening. You can feel very confident about it. And yeah, I think Hawkinson is going to be great. I think it's only just been a question of when that was going to happen. And right now, to me, it seems like things are lining up that this could be the year. So I've moved him ahead of even Gronk at this point. I have him ranked as a low-end tight end 1. And I think at some point soon, we are going to see him as a top 5 fantasy tight end. And maybe it could be this year. For a faller, though, maybe Mike Gesicki, and it's not even his fault. It's just because I thought Preston Williams was going to take longer to get back from this torn ACL. I thought he was going to be slow to begin the season, but it looks like he's firing on all cylinders. He's making plays in practice. The beat writers don't seem concerned about that injury. So, that will hurt Gesicki's outlook unless Devontae Parker's injury turns out to be something. And now Devontae Parker has missed a week of practice, I believe. So we'll see where he's at early in the season. Maybe that'll keep Gesicki still up a little higher. But that's the one for me that I was really interested in him. And now I'm kind of shying away and starting to grab some of those other late round breakout guys over Gesicki now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, Hawkinson being ranked as a low-end tight end 1 is a little too rich for me personally. I still have him down because you're looking at as long as Marvin Jones is on the field, I don't know if there's enough passing volume in this offense. Now you can talk about, though, if DeAndre Swift doesn't come back fully healthy and is ready to go week 1, then they might have to throw the ball a little bit more than they were anticipating. That can create some volume and opportunity there for Hawkinson. So I'm not necessarily there with you, but throw all these guys into a blender, right? Throw them all into a blender from tight end 12 to 20, and
Absolutely.
one of them is going to break out, maybe 2 of them, right? 2 of these guys are going to break out. So Hawkinson has the talent, right? He has the talent to absolutely do it. So I get it.
Is Jonnu Smith in that blender?
He would be yes, he's in that blender, but I have him yes. Yeah. It's a weird comparison with Jonnu Smith there. Anyway, for me, the guy that I talked about, Blake Jarwin, is the guy who's rising at my rankings. The guy who just consistently falls down is Rob Gronkowski. I mean, we haven't seen Gronk fully healthy and in football shape, right? He lost so much weight last season after not playing. He's trying to put it all back on, or at least to the point where he's in football shape. And from what we're seeing is that I think, and this is partly to do too, because O.J. Howard has been receiving a ton of buzz coming out of Bucs camp. And so if you can rely on O.J. Howard and then bring Gronk on only in red zone situations where you don't have to have him on the field in these, blocking situations or outrunning routes where his energy can get zapped really early, you can bring him on in the part of the field that he is excellent at. So he could still finish with, 6+ receiving touchdowns on the season. But as far as a target total, that's going to come crashing down, I think. I don't think we're going to see anywhere close to the type of Gronk that we've seen in previous years. And he's going as the 10th tight end off the board right now in ADP. That's just someone who just consistently falls further down my board with O.J. Howard coming up because I think his involvement is going to be a little bit more. So Tags, really quick here on Gronk. You kind of in agreement there that we could see O.J. Howard more of a factor?
Yeah, I'm so torn on this one because I felt like Gronk was a safe low-end tight end 1. He wasn't going to win you a fantasy league, but he was going to be fine with Brady because it was the one guy that he was he had some chemistry with coming over from obviously the Patriots. But I'm with you because Peter King, a guy that's continually plugged in with NFL teams, he said that it's very possible that Gronk ranks 3rd on the Bucs in tight end snaps. That's terrible. If he's not on the field and he's only coming on the field in like red zone packages or whatever, he's going to crush you, and he's going to be, nothing more than a touchdown dependent streamer, which we could have said about someone like Darren Fells last year. So I don't think you would be drafting Darren Fells at 10 overall. But again, it is Rob Gronkowski. He is one of the greatest, if not the greatest tight end of all time. So I want to give him some credit, but at the same time, you don't know what that year away from football did to him.
Yeah, I think the only spot that I got Gronk this year was in Scott Fishbowl, and that's tight end premium. And he fell to, I was just waiting for value wherever it was going to end up, and Gronk fell to tight end 16. And at that point, I was like, absolutely, that's a fantastic value. But the more I look at it now, and with these reports coming out, like you said with Peter King, maybe that's more where he actually should be ranked.
Right. No, that's right where I have him at. I have him at tight end 15, and I can even make the case that if he is going to come on in these red zone packages, that he could be even further down than that. So, all right, guys, that is going to do it for today's show. Justin, we know that this time of year is insane, so we appreciate you carving out some time to chat with us, man.
Yeah, I always appreciate you guys having me on, and good luck this year, and good luck in the accuracy contest and all that. It should be a very interesting and chaotic season.
That's for sure. Don't forget to find and follow him on Twitter, guys, at Justin Boone. You can also find and follow Tags Night on Twitter at Kyle Y NFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL if you don't already. We know drafts are happening this weekend, guys, and we're going to make sure that you are well prepared for them. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I just want to remind you about our draft assistant really quick. You can sync with your draft and get pick suggestions and the percent chance any player gets picked before your turn. You can draft straight from the draft assistant for NFL.com and ESPN drafts using our Copilot feature. It's very easy to use and supports leagues from a ton of different websites. Crush your draft with our draft assistant at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Also, you can get the most out of our draft assistant by becoming a Hall of Fame subscriber. We're offering 6 free months of our Hall of Fame package at fantasypros.com/offers, so go check it out. Huge thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring today's podcast. Don't forget that this season there's a brand new way to play fantasy football on FanDuel. Introducing Best Ball Contest, the simplest way to play season-long fantasy. If you're new to FanDuel, you can even get a 20% bonus on your first deposit, up to $500 when you sign up at fanduel.com/fantasypros. So be sure to go to fanduel.com/fantasypros to start drafting for Best Ball at FanDuel. And I want to make sure that we thank Trophy Smack for sponsoring today's podcast. I love my trophy from Trophy Smack, and I know that you're going to too. Trophy Smack is offering our listeners a free championship ring with any trophy or belt purchase. Just add your free ring to cart with your epic trophy or belt and use promo code FantasyPros at checkout. Visit TrophySmack.com/FantasyPros to customize your league's trophy now. TrophySmack.com/FantasyPros. For Mike Tagliere and Justin Boone, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. While you're here, don't forget to check out the featured videos. While you're at it, go over to Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Fantasy Pros to get news and updates throughout your season to help you dominate the competition.